I hit the trail just as the sun dipped behind the ridges, painting the Appalachians in streaks of bruised purple and gold. The forest usually welcomed me with the familiar hum of wildlife, but tonight was different. Silence stretched in every direction, thick and unnatural, pressing against my chest with a weight I couldn't shake. Even the usual trail markers seemed off. Trees that should have stood to guide me looked twisted, their bark scarred in ways that made me pause. My boots crunched on the leaf-strewn path, each sound unnervingly loud in the stillness, and I realized with a jolt that I felt watched. Then it came. A low, guttural growl, distant but deliberate, reverberating through the trees. My heartbeat spiked as a sharp snap broke the quiet again, closer this time. I froze, straining my eyes into the thickening shadows. Nothing moved, yet every instinct screamed something was there, just beyond my vision, lurking. The wind whispered through, the canopy carrying hints of movement, subtle and deliberate. I gripped my rifle tighter, forcing my mind to focus, but the creeping unease gnawed at me. This wasn't the peaceful hunting trip I had planned. Something was out there, watching, waiting, and I knew, without knowing how, that my night in the mountains was about to take a turn I wouldn't forget. I tried to settle in, telling myself I was just being jumpy. The forest had always felt alive, but tonight it was different. Watching, waiting. I moved cautiously along a faint path, scanning the underbrush for deer or squirrels, anything familiar, but the only movement I saw was in the corner of my eye. Broken branches littered the trail, bent and twisted as if something much larger had passed through. Footprints marred the dirt, too deep and oddly shaped to belong to any animal I recognized. My stomach knotted and I slowed, straining to hear, over the pounding of my own heart. The sun sank lower, shadows stretching into dark, twisted shapes. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig felt like a signal, a deliberate warning. I told myself it was imagination, that my eyes were playing tricks, but I couldn't ignore the flashes of shadow flitting between the trees, just at the edge of visibility. The forest felt sentient, responding to my presence with a quiet, patient malice. I crouched to inspect a set of footprints and my breath caught. They weren't animal tracks at all. They were human-like, distorted, uneven, and the spacing suggested a creature that walked differently, moving with a purpose I couldn't comprehend. Panic bubbled up, but so did curiosity. I wanted to see what was out there, even as every instinct screamed to leave. The longer I stood, the more I felt the weight of unseen eyes pressing in from every angle. It was a presence that wasn't just observing. It was considering me, learning, adapting, studying. I tried calling out, my voice cracking, but the forest swallowed the sound. Silence returned, heavier than before, punctuated only by subtle, deliberate movements just beyond the reach of my flashlight. Night fell fully, and I realized I was utterly alone, yet not alone at all. The darkness had a rhythm, a pulse that matched mine, and the shadows seemed to move with intention. Whatever was watching, it knew I was there, and the forest itself seemed complicit, guiding me, ensnaring me in a trap I couldn't yet see. Fear mingled with awe, and I knew that my hunting trip had crossed a line. I wasn't just in the woods anymore. I was inside something alive, patient, and infinitely more dangerous than I could have imagined. I tried to push rational thought into my mind to remind myself that the forest could be explained by logic, animals, wind, or tired eyes playing tricks. But the deeper I went, the harder it became. Shadows twisted unnaturally, and the silence pressed in so thick it felt almost solid. Memories of local legends I'd heard as a child clawed their way back. Stories of wendigos, spirits of the forest that hunted those who wandered too far, entities that could mimic humans and lure the curious to their doom. I shivered and forced myself to keep moving, rifle ready, every nerve screaming caution. Then I heard it, a whisper drifting through the trees. At first it was faint, almost blending with the rustling leaves, but then it grew clearer, eerily, familiar. It sounded like me, my own voice echoing words I hadn't said aloud, calling me deeper into the forest. My pulse quickened and I spun in a circle, trying to pinpoint its source, but there was nothing, only fog curling between the trunks, thickening like it had a life of its own. The whispers intensified, layered with subtle variations, almost playful, almost intelligent, and I felt a shiver of dread that ran from my spine to my fingertips. Through the mist, I caught movement. A cloaked figure, humanoid but impossibly still, appeared for a heartbeat before melting back into the fog. I blinked, and it was gone, but the memory of it stayed, an imprint of wrongness that refused to fade. Its presence confirmed what I had been too afraid to admit. The forest wasn't just dangerous, it was malevolent. I could feel it in the way the air seemed to push against me, in the subtle shift of shadows, and in the intelligence behind the whispers that mimicked my voice. Every step forward was now a struggle between curiosity and fear. My heart thumped as I realized I was no longer alone in any rational sense. Something else was here, watching, learning, and possibly toying with me. I forced myself to keep moving, each sound amplified, every shadow suspicious, knowing that one misstep could be the last, and the forest, alive in ways I could not understand, seemed to be guiding me, testing me, drawing me toward something I wasn't sure I wanted to see. Panic finally won out over hesitation. I decided to leave, to retrace my steps back to the main trail and the safety of the truck. But the forest had other plans. Every path I thought I recognized twisted and looped back, turning the familiar into a maze. Trees that had stood in one place minutes ago now seemed to shift subtly, blocking my line of sight or guiding me deeper into the dark. My pulse hammered in my ears as I tried to stay calm, telling myself it was just disorientation, but deep down I knew something was intentionally misleading me. Shadows moved around me, fluid and deliberate, darting between the trunks like living smoke. I froze, eyes scanning every direction, and caught glimpses of glowing eyes in multiple locations, watching, judging, never blinking. The hairs on my arms stood on end, and my chest tightened as the sensation of being stalked wrapped around me like a vice. Every instinct screamed to run, yet the forest seemed to stretch endlessly, each step forward leading me deeper into its snare. I stumbled over roots and rocks, heart racing, breath ragged, trying to push away the creeping terror that threatened to paralyze me. I called out, my voice cracking, but the forest swallowed my words, returning only echoes that sounded faintly human, faintly mocking. The longer I moved, the heavier the air felt, each exhale mingling with the whispers that now circled me from all sides. A rustle to my left made me spin, but nothing was there, only the shifting fog and the unnatural sway of shadows. I began to feel the psychological weight pressing down, the isolation gnawing at the edges of my mind. My rational thoughts fractured under the constant pressure of fear and uncertainty. The forest was alive in a way I couldn't understand, aware of me and patient. It didn't chase recklessly. It observed, waiting for a mistake. By the time I realized how hopelessly lost I was, my panic had reached a fever pitch. Each step forward felt like walking further into a trap I could not see, a cage made of trees and darkness that bent reality to its will. I understood then that this hunt was no longer about deer or survival. It was about me being hunted, and the forest itself had become the predator. I stumbled into a small clearing, the sudden openness disorienting after the oppressive weight of the forest. Moonlight spilled through the gaps in the canopy, casting pale, uneven shadows across the ground. That's when I saw it. At first I thought it was human, but the shape was wrong. Limbs too long, angles too sharp, movements that seemed to bend reality itself. Its face was a grotesque mask of distorted features, eyes too wide and intelligent, scanning, calculating. My stomach dropped and I pressed myself against the rough bark of a tree, trying not to breathe too loud. A memory surfaced, the warnings from old Appalachian tales about spirits that mimic humans to lure travelers to their doom. Every instinct screamed that this was one of them. The creature tilted its head, unnatural and deliberate, like it could see into the smallest corners of my fear. Each movement was unnervingly graceful, controlled, intelligent, as though it understood exactly how to terrorize. I pressed myself lower, inching behind a fallen log. From my hiding spot, I could see it roam the clearing, not blindly searching, but studying, learning, waiting. Its glowing eyes swept the forest with methodical patience, and every snap of a twig beneath my feet made me flinch. I realized this was not a mindless predator. It was calculating, testing, observing, perhaps even enjoying the terror it caused. Minutes stretched into eternity. I dared not move, every muscle coiled like a spring ready to snap. When it finally paused, head cocked toward some distant sound, I seized the moment. I crept carefully along the edge of the clearing, keeping low, heart hammering in my chest. The creature's attention never faltered, its presence a constant, suffocating weight. By sheer luck, or maybe the forest itself granting me mercy, I slipped past it, the mist swallowing me as I made my escape. Even as I put distance between myself and the clearing, I knew the terror wasn't over. The intelligence behind its movements haunted me, the sense that it had not given up, that it was always watching. My breaths came in ragged gasps, my mind spinning with disbelief. I had survived, but barely, and the memory of those glowing, calculating eyes would follow me, lingering in every shadow, in every rustle, reminding me that this forest had more patience than any hunter, and I had only just begun to understand its cruelty. By the first pale light of dawn, I stumbled back to my truck, heart still hammering and limbs trembling. To my disbelief, the engine roared to life as if it had never failed me, and I slid into the driver's seat, hands shaking as I gripped the wheel. Relief surged through me, but it was fragile, quickly replaced by a gnawing unease. The forest, behind me, seemed impossibly still, yet I could feel its presence lingering, a weight pressing against my back even through the open windows. As I drove, I noticed faint footprints in the dirt beside the road, scattered and irregular, vanishing, mysteriously as if they had never existed. A soft whisper brushed against my ears, barely audible, curling around the cab and echoing from the rearview mirror. I froze, convinced I had imagined it, only to see the shadow of movement flicker at the edge of the glass. Every glance at the trees along the roadside made my skin crawl, the sense of being watched refusing to leave me. By the time I reached the main highway, I understood something terrifying. Leaving the forest didn't mean escaping it. Its horrors had marked me, followed me, and would not release their grip. Even miles away, I could feel eyes in the shadows, whispers in the wind, and a knowledge that I had been chosen. And deep down, I knew this wasn't over. The Appalachians would wait, patient and patient, until the forest called me back. I had hiked this section of the Appalachians dozens of times, yet as I rounded a familiar bend at dusk, something new caught my eye. A trail marker, freshly carved, its symbols twisted and unfamiliar. The wood seemed almost to glimmer in the fading light, beckoning me down a narrow, unmarked path I had never noticed before. A chill ran down my spine, warning me to turn back, but curiosity anchored my feet, pulling me forward despite every instinct screaming caution. The forest fell into an eerie silence. Birds stilled, wind died, and the fog thickened around the trunks, curling like restless spirits. Shadows stretched long and unnatural, bending along the path, almost as if the trees themselves were watching. Every footfall seemed amplified in the heavy air, and I felt eyes pressing against me from the depths of the woods, unseen but unmistakable. As I pressed onward, strange etchings appeared on the trees, crude spirals, lines, and symbols that whispered of rituals I could not understand. The mist clung to my skin, dampening my resolve, yet a faint, flickering light ahead compelled me to move closer. It danced just beyond the trees, teasing the edge of vision, promising answers or danger, and I stepped forward, heart hammering, unaware that whatever lay ahead was meant to remain hidden, and that I had already crossed the threshold into something far darker than I could imagine. I stepped off the familiar trail, following the strange marker deeper into the forest, where the trees pressed close and the fog thickened, curling around gnarled roots like living fingers. Every footfall felt heavier, each snap of a twig echoing far too loudly in the oppressive silence. Rustling sounds came from every direction, sometimes subtle, sometimes sharp, and I froze each time, my heart hammering against my ribs. Something was moving in the periphery, just beyond the reach of my vision, but whenever I turned my head, nothing was there. The forest seemed to shift around me, as if it were aware of my intrusion, nudging me towards something it wanted me to see, or perhaps away from it. I came upon a small clearing and my breath caught. A fire pit, cold but recently used, sat in the center. Nearby, old tools lay abandoned on the ground, their handles worn smooth, edges dulled by time. Crude symbols were etched into the surrounding trees, spirals and jagged lines that made my skin crawl. I traced one with my finger, feeling the rough bark under my fingertips, and a shiver shot down my spine. Shadows moved strangely among the trees, bending at impossible angles, vanishing when I blinked. Faint lantern lights flickered through the mist, illuminating the outlines of figures just beyond sight. Whispers drifted on the wind, low and urgent, too soft to catch words but sharp enough to make me freeze in place. My curiosity wrestled with terror, drawing me closer even as every instinct screamed to run. The air seemed thicker here, heavy with some ancient energy, and I felt the weight of eyes, human or not entirely human, tracking my movements. Each detail, every flicker of light, every whisper tightened the knot in my chest, reminding me that I had wandered into a space hidden from the world, a place where folklore and reality collided, and where the consequences of discovery might be far darker than I could imagine. I pushed forward through the thickening fog, my boots sinking slightly into damp earth, following a path that seemed to have been carved by unseen hands. Ahead, a faint plume of smoke curled into the gray sky, and I caught sight of structures, a small cabin and a few huts clustered as if the forest itself had grown them into existence. The air thickened, carrying the scent of burning wood mixed with something unfamiliar, earthy and slightly acrid. Figures moved around the fire. Adults and children alike went about their tasks, but their motions were too precise, too synchronized, as if rehearsed for some ritual I couldn't comprehend. Their clothes were outdated, patched and worn, hanging in ways that made them seem frozen in time. Faces were pale, expressionless, eyes sharp and alert, glinting briefly as they caught the dim light. Shadows stretched from their bodies at impossible angles, sometimes lagging or moving independently, as though something else, something unseen, slithered just behind them. I crouched behind a fallen log, heart hammering, and scribbled frantic notes in my journal, documenting the impossible. Whispers carried across the clearing, words that didn't reach comprehension yet carried weight, a cadence that made my stomach twist. From the corner of my eye, fleeting shapes darted between trees, glimpses of figures that dissolved when I tried to focus. Every instinct screamed at me to retreat, but morbid curiosity held me rooted. Then it happened. One of the adults turned abruptly, eyes locking with mine. It was a glance so precise, so aware, that I felt my chest tighten as if the forest itself had reached through the mist to grasp me. The fog thickened, almost responding to the tension, folding around the trees and structures like a living barrier. I realized with a jolt that I was trespassing in a domain that belonged to them, whatever they were, and the forest was part of the barrier that kept outsiders out. My pulse raced as I weighed my next move. Step closer to witness more of this impossible scene, or retreat quietly and hope they didn't follow. Every second stretched taut with danger. Every breath threatened to betray my presence, and the weight of being watched pressed down with a suffocating, almost sentient force. Night swallowed the forest, thick and heavy, and I pressed myself against the gnarled roots of an old oak, trying to disappear into its shadow. My breath came in shallow, panicked gasps, every rustle of leaves sending jolts of terror through me. Then, I heard it. A deliberate snap, too precise to be the forest settling, and I froze. Shapes moved through the mist, slipping between trees with a silence that made my blood run cold. Figures emerged from the shadows surrounding me. The father stepped first, his face unnervingly calm, eyes glinting with a strange awareness. The mother followed, expressionless, moving without sound, her gaze fixed entirely on me. Behind them, the children appeared, small forms gliding across the undergrowth with an unnatural grace. The girl's voice cut through the night, hollow and echoing, reverberating in the trees like some long-forgotten chant. My legs trembled, yet I could not move. Some invisible force rooted me to the spot. One of the children reached toward me, not aggressively, but with a command I could not resist. I followed them, compelled forward through the mist, my mind racing with disbelief and fear. The cabin came into view, dim lanterns casting flickering light over walls etched with crude symbols. Jars lined the shelves, filled with herbs, bones, and unidentifiable objects. The air seemed to pulse with a presence older than the forest itself, alive and watchful. Shadows shifted unnaturally, flickering in ways no candle or lantern could create. Sounds warped around me. Distant whispers, laughter, and growls blended into a symphony of menace. I struggled to distinguish human from something else, each detail bending reality. Every instinct screamed to run, yet I was caught in the impossible rhythm of the family's motions, their calm, deliberate menace wrapping around me like fog. I realized, with a gnawing dread, that I had crossed into a space where the rules of the living no longer applied. Human or not, spectral or corporeal, I could not tell. The forest itself seemed to lean in, pressing shadows closer, amplifying every heartbeat, every tremor of fear. I was trapped in their domain, an intruder caught between curiosity and survival, forced to confront the thin, terrifying line between what was human and what had been conjured by the dark, hidden heart of these woods. I waited until the family's attention shifted, until the mist thickened and swallowed the edges of the clearing, before I moved. Each step was careful, deliberate, pressing myself against trees, using the shadows as cover. The forest seemed to breathe around me, exhaling cold air that smelled of earth and decay. Twigs snapped underfoot, but I forced my breath steady, forcing one foot in front of the other, trying to slip away without drawing notice. As I navigated the twisting path, I noticed strange carvings in the bark, spirals, jagged symbols, and sigils that seemed older than anything I'd seen before. Talismans hung from low branches, swaying gently though no wind moved them. Each mark and object whispered of rituals, of a family bound to something far older than themselves, a presence woven into the forest itself. My heart raced with each step, half fear, half fascination. Ghostly figures flickered in the fog, shapes that blended seamlessly with the trees, rising and falling like smoke. Whispers drifted through the mist, low and insistent, urging me to turn back, to abandon curiosity and run. Relief washed over me in small moments when the path opened, only for dread to return as the shadows seemed to stretch, pulse, and twist, as if the forest itself were alive and aware of my every movement. Finally, after what felt like hours, the familiar outline of the main trail appeared. My legs burned, lungs screamed, and I stumbled toward my car, fumbling with the keys as my fingers shook uncontrollably. I slid into the seat, locking the doors, but even there, relief was fleeting. The fog curled along the tires, and from the rearview mirror I thought I saw pale shapes among the trees, watching, waiting. Even as I drove away, questions clawed at my mind. Who were they? How long had they lived hidden here? Was it simply isolation or something darker, rooted in folklore, magic, or curse? The forest loomed behind me, silent yet knowing, a place that had swallowed their secrets for generations. I realized that I had glimpsed only a fraction of what this place held, and though I had escaped physically, its shadow had imprinted itself on me, a lingering unease that would not fade. The woods were still watching, and whatever lived within them remained, patient, hidden, eternal. I sank back into the driver's seat, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached, and exhaled shakily, trying to convince myself I had left it all behind. The night's impossible events replayed in my mind. The pale faces, the synchronized movements, the flickering lights, and the symbols etched deep into the trees. Were they human, or something older, something born of the forest itself? The thought gnawed at me with a persistent chill. Fog rolled across the road ahead, curling and thickening, erasing the path I had taken, swallowing the cabin and clearing into nothingness. Relief flickered inside me, brief and fragile, but when I glanced in the rearview mirror, my stomach dropped. A pale face lingered at the edge of the trees, eyes catching the faint moonlight, watching. The image vanished almost immediately, leaving only the lingering awareness that I had not truly escaped. Even as my car carried me further from the forest, questions remained, insistent and heavy. Who, or what, had I seen? How long had they lived hidden here? And what had I stumbled into? The marker, the path, the forest itself, all felt alive, patient, and eternal. I realized some secrets were never meant to be uncovered, and the shadows of the Appalachians would remain, waiting for the next unwary traveler to follow where I had dared to go. I was walking down a narrow trail in the Appalachian forest, my dog tugging at the leash with the restless energy of a creature sensing something I couldn't. The sun had just dipped below the ridges, leaving the woods painted in bruised purples and fading gold. Normally this path was quiet, comforting even, but tonight the air felt heavy, almost charged, and every instinct in my body told me to pay attention. My dog froze abruptly, hackles raised, barking furiously at nothing I could. Sea branches snapped in the distance faintly, but not like deer or raccoons. Leaves rustled unnaturally, carrying whispers that seemed almost deliberate, curling around the trunks and curling into the mist. My pulse spiked as I strained to listen, every sense screaming that I wasn't alone. The dog continued barking, backing up slightly, refusing to move forward, and I could feel the tension radiating off him in waves. I called his name, trying to mask my own unease, but the sounds in the forest didn't stop. They multiplied, echoing in ways that made the shadows seem alive. My heart hammered as I realized this was no ordinary night, no ordinary walk. Something was out there, just beyond the edge of my vision, and for the first time in years, the familiar woods felt foreign, hostile, and watching me with quiet, patient intent. I knelt beside my dog, trying to calm him, but even as I scratched behind his ears, his body remained tense, muscles coiled like springs. His low growl vibrated in his chest, and every hair along his spine stood on end. I squinted into the darkening forest, scanning for movement, but all I saw were the familiar trunks and underbrush. Yet something felt wrong. Branches had been snapped, some freshly broken, jutting into the path like jagged teeth. Footprints marred the dirt, deep and irregular, far too large and oddly shaped to belong to any animal I knew. My stomach churned as I studied them, tracing their path into the shadows. The last light of the day slipped beneath the ridges, and the forest transformed. Colors faded into gray and black, and shadows flickered at the edge of my vision, disappearing when I tried to focus. Every sound was amplified, the snap of a twig, the shuffle of leaves, the faint rustle that didn't belong to the wind. My dog barked again, straining at the leash, backing toward me, and I felt a prickle of fear that wasn't entirely rational. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that animals were probably moving nearby, maybe deer or stray dogs, but the sense of being watched pressed down on me. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was lingering just beyond sight, patient and deliberate. Curiosity gnawed at me, fighting with my fear. My pulse raced, and I realized I was caught in a strange limbo, drawn to discover what was there, yet terrified of what I might find. The air seemed to thicken, pressing against my chest as I took cautious steps along the trail. Every movement drew me further into the forest, but also closer to the unknown presence. It was watching, calculating, silent, but undeniably there. My dog growled again, low and warning, and I understood that whatever was out there had noticed me first. I could feel it, the forest itself somehow alive and aware, and I knew that this night, this path, and the shadows surrounding us would change everything. I forced myself to keep walking, though every instinct urged me to turn back. The forest had taken on a different character in the dim light. Shadows stretched unnaturally, twisting over roots and rocks, and the air felt thick, almost pulsing around me. Memories of the stories I'd grown up hearing in the Appalachians rose unbidden, wendigos that hunted those who wandered too far, forest spirits that mimicked human voices, and entities that lured travelers into the dark to vanish without a trace. I had always dismissed them as folklore, but tonight they felt terrifyingly plausible. A whisper drifted through the trees, soft at first, like the wind brushing over dry leaves. Then it sharpened, carrying a familiarity that made my blood run cold. It sounded like me, my own voice echoing phrases I hadn't spoken aloud. I spun around, flashlight trembling in my hands, scanning the mist-shrouded underbrush, but there was nothing. The whisper repeated, layered now, each echo a subtle mockery, urging me to step further into the fog. My pulse raced, and I could feel the tension radiating off my dog, who growled low and refused to move forward. Then, through the swirling mist, I caught it. A figure, humanoid, shrouded in shadow, barely visible for a heartbeat before melting back into the fog. Its movements were fluid but unnatural, almost inhuman, and the shape lingered in my mind even after it vanished. My stomach knotted, and I realized with a sinking certainty that I was not alone. The forest was alive with something malevolent, intelligent and patient. Every step became heavier, weighted with the knowledge that unseen eyes tracked my every move. My dog whimpered, pressing close, and I could hear the whispers curling around us, circling, coaxing, mocking. Fear mixed with disbelief, and I questioned my own sanity, wondering if exhaustion had warped reality. But the figure I glimpsed was no figment. It had a presence, a will, and it had noticed me. I understood then that the forest was more than a backdrop. It was a predator, and I had wandered straight into its waiting jaws. Panic overtook reason, and I decided I had to leave, to find the main trail or anything that looked familiar, but the forest refused to cooperate. Every path I tried seemed to twist back on itself, trees shifting in ways that made it impossible to orient myself. Roots and rocks snagged my boots, and the underbrush seemed denser, closing in as if the woods themselves were alive and deliberately corralling me deeper into their grasp. My dog barked frantically, tugging at the leash, growling at shadows I couldn't see. Glowing eyes appeared intermittently through the fog, reflecting the flashlight in ways that made my stomach tighten. Some were close, some distant, but all unblinking, intelligent, watching. Every time I tried to move in what I thought was the right direction, the forest seemed to loop, twisting reality. My mind spun as exhaustion and fear mingled, and I realized I could no longer trust my senses. I called out, voice cracking, hoping for a human response. But the sound was swallowed instantly, replaced by whispers that echoed back fragments of my own words. Each echo seemed to come from multiple directions at once, confusing my ears and mind. I felt trapped, my pulse hammering as the shadows flickered around me, moving unnaturally, dancing just at the edge of sight. The dog whined and barked again, eyes darting in panic. I tried to soothe him, but my own fear made my voice tremble. Every step forward felt like sinking deeper into quicksand. The forest not just surrounding us, but actively manipulating the terrain, the shadows, the very air. It wasn't just a place anymore. It was an entity, patient, cunning, and aware of my every movement. By the time I realized how thoroughly disoriented I was, my rational mind was fraying. The sense of being stalked was suffocating, relentless, and undeniable. Whatever lurked in these woods was intelligent and deliberate, not hunting blindly but calculating, testing, learning. Each step I took was a gamble, a move in a game I hadn't agreed to play, and I understood with a cold certainty that the forest had no intention of letting me leave without exacting its price. I stumbled into a small clearing, the sudden openness disorienting after the oppressive weight of the forest. Moonlight spilled through the gaps in the canopy, illuminating the fog in pale, ghostly streaks. That's when I saw it. At first I thought it was human, but something was unmistakably wrong. Its limbs were elongated, angular in ways that made my stomach twist, and it moved with a fluidity that defied natural motion. Its face was a grotesque distortion, features blurred and wrong, yet there was intelligence in its unblinking eyes, a calculating patience that froze me in place. My dog growled low, refusing to move, hackles raised as I pressed myself against the trunk of a tree. I remembered the old Appalachian stories, spirits that mimicked humans, creatures that lured travelers into the woods to vanish without a trace. Every instinct screamed that this was one of them. The entity tilted its head, scanning the clearing, with deliberate care, and I could feel its gaze crawling over us, aware of our presence. I inched behind a fallen log, heart hammering in my chest. From my hiding spot, I watched it roam methodically, moving not randomly but with purpose. It studied the clearing, sniffing the air, and pausing as if testing its prey. The whispers I had heard earlier now seemed to emanate from it, echoing. My own voice, taunting, coaxing. My dog whimpered softly but stayed low, sensing the intelligence behind the entity's movements. For what felt like hours, I held my breath, waiting, calculating, until a small opening presented itself. I seized, it moving slowly, deliberately, keeping low to avoid detection. The creature paused, head tilting unnaturally, but allowed me to pass, disappearing momentarily into the fog as though it had other matters to attend to. By the time we cleared the clearing, I realized how close I had come to being caught. The forest itself felt complicit in its hunt, shaping the terrain, the shadows, and the fog to ensnare me. Even as I put distance between myself and that clearing, the memory of its glowing, intelligent eyes stayed with me, a constant reminder that I had survived by luck and cunning. The woods had tested me, and the predator had not yet finished learning. By the first pale light of dawn, my legs burned and my lungs heaved as my dog and I stumbled back to the trailhead. The forest behind us seemed impossibly still, yet every instinct told me it was not empty. Somehow, the trail I had struggled to navigate in darkness now looked familiar, almost welcoming, but I couldn't shake the weight pressing against my back. My dog stayed close, ears flat, eyes darting nervously to the edges of the trees as if he could still sense what I could not. I glanced back and saw nothing, yet my stomach tightened as a memory surfaced. Footprints in the dirt, large and irregular, vanishing as if they had never existed. A faint whisper brushed against my ears, curling around the cab of my truck and echoing from the rearview mirror. I froze, my heart hammering, convinced I imagined it, only to see a fleeting shadow flicker at the edge of my vision. Even as we drove away, the feeling of being watched lingered, a cold presence I could not shake. The forest had not released us. It had marked us. The whispers, the shadows, and the intelligence behind those eyes would follow me, patient and waiting. And deep down, I knew one day, the forest would call us back, and whatever lurked there would not forget. I had walked this trail countless times, yet as the sun dipped behind the Appalachian ridges, I noticed something different. A patch of leaves disturbed, half hidden beneath the underbrush, as if someone had buried something in haste. Kneeling, I brushed them aside and uncovered a small weathered journal. Its leather cover was cracked and stiff, pages yellowed and curling at the edges. A strange mix of unease and fascination settled over me as I lifted it, feeling the weight of whatever secrets it might hold. Flipping through the pages, I saw sketches that twisted reality, figures moving in unnatural ways, symbols I couldn't comprehend, and writings fragmented and jagged, hinting at rituals or warnings. The forest around me grew quiet, too quiet, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. Shadows lingered longer than they should, stretching across the path and twisting in impossible angles. The air thickened, carrying a subtle, cold pressure against my skin, and an eerie stillness wrapped around me like a living shroud. Then faintly I heard it, a whisper, barely audible, curling through the branches, drawing me deeper into the woods. Curiosity burned hotter than fear, compelling me to follow the sound, to uncover the story hidden within the journal's pages, even as every instinct screamed that some things in these mountains were meant to remain buried, unseen, and untouched. Sank against the gnarled roots of a towering oak, journal resting on my knees, and tried to make sense of the pages before me. Each line of handwriting was uneven, jagged in some places, hurried in others, as if the writer had been driven by urgency or fear. The first entries described a family living deep in these mountains, hidden from the world, their days filled with rituals and strange, almost mechanical routines. Flickering lights appeared in the forest at night, according to the journal, accompanied by whispers and occasional vanishings, people who had come too close and never returned. My stomach twisted as I traced symbols that defied explanation, spirals, angular markings, shapes that seemed almost alive on the page. As I read, I became aware of the forest reacting around me. Branches swayed without a breeze, leaves shivered though the air was still, and distant rustling carried with a precision that no ordinary animal could make. Every snap of a twig sounded amplified, like it belonged to something far larger than it should. My heart thumped in my chest as I scanned the ground. Broken branches led in no clear direction, and footprints, partially obscured by fallen leaves, hinted that someone, or something, had passed through here recently. Small talismans tied haphazardly to low branches swung gently, though the wind remained absent. Curiosity warred with fear, drawing me deeper into the woods as I tried to reconcile the journal's contents with the reality around me. Each step seemed heavier than the last, shadows flickering at the edges of my vision as if trying to warn me or push me onward. The further I ventured, the more the forest felt like a living entity, aware of my intrusion, guiding me toward something it wanted me to see, or perhaps away from it. I knew instinctively that following these clues could lead to answers, but I also understood that it might lead me straight into danger. Every part of me screamed to turn back, yet my hands clutched the journal, compelling me forward. With a final glance at the fading light above, I took a cautious step into the dense undergrowth, feeling the oppressive weight of the forest pressing down, and realized there was no turning back. Not yet. Not while the journal still had more secrets to reveal. Following the journal's cryptic directions, I pressed deeper into the forest, each step deliberate, every branch I pushed aside feeling like a gate opening into a hidden world. The undergrowth thickened, fog curled around the trunks like restless spirits, and the faint light of the setting sun barely penetrated the canopy. Then suddenly, the trees parted to reveal a small clearing, and my heart caught in my chest. At the center stood a dilapidated cabin, its crooked chimney curling smoke lazily into the darkening sky, the fire inside flickering with an eerie orange glow. Figures moved around the clearing, adults and children alike, but something about them felt off. Their motions were unnaturally synchronized, as if each gesture had been rehearsed countless times. Clothes, patched and worn, hung from their bodies in a way that made them appear both old-fashioned and timeless. Faces were pale, expressionless, eyes glinting in the lantern light with an unsettling calm that made my stomach twist. Shadows bent and stretched along the ground, sometimes moving independently of their owners, casting shapes that should not have been possible. Lantern light flickered across talismans tied to trees and crude symbols carved into the cabin walls, confirming what the journal hinted at: rituals, hidden practices, and a family that existed outside ordinary time. Whispers floated through the air, low and urgent, carrying meaning I couldn't comprehend but felt deep in my chest. Every instinct told me to retreat, yet my feet remained rooted, curiosity binding me in place. Then, one of the figures stopped abruptly and turned toward me. Eyes met mine, sharp and knowing, a moment stretching long and heavy, full of recognition or warning. My pulse surged, and the forest seemed to lean closer, the air thickening with tension. Every sound, every flicker of shadow made me feel observed, as if the very woods were alive and aware of my intrusion. I realized I had crossed into a domain not meant for outsiders, where every step, every breath carried consequences I could not yet predict. I hesitated, torn between fleeing before discovery or moving closer to witness the strange, hypnotic world the journal had led me to. Night had fully settled over the Appalachians, smothering the forest in darkness that seemed almost tangible. I pressed myself against a mossy tree trunk, hoping the shadows would conceal me, but I felt their presence before I saw them. Figures emerged from the mist, moving silently, deliberately, surrounding me. The father stepped forward first, his face calm but unnervingly sharp, eyes glinting like darkened mirrors. The mother followed, expressionless, her gaze fixed entirely on me. Behind them, the children glided through the undergrowth with an unnatural grace, pale and quiet, their movements precise, almost ritualistic. Then a small voice cut through, the fog hollow and echoing, vibrating with an unnatural timbre that made my teeth ache. "You shouldn't be here," it intoned, and I froze, my chest tightening. I could not move, could not speak, compelled forward by a force I did not understand. Slowly, I found myself stepping toward the cabin, each footfall heavier than the last, drawn into their circle. Inside, the cabin reeked of damp earth and burning herbs. Symbols were etched deep into the wooden walls, spirals, angular shapes, and jagged sigils I could not comprehend. Herbs, bones, and small trinkets were arranged, deliberately on tables and shelves, hanging from the ceiling like talismans meant to bind unseen forces. Lanterns flickered, casting distorted shadows that bent across the walls and floor, and the sounds of the forest outside seemed to warp, echoing unnaturally, blending animal cries and human whispers into a chorus of unease. I realized then that I could no longer distinguish human from something else. The family's calm menace merged with the forest itself, as if the trees leaned closer, pressing me into their dominion. My pulse raced, every instinct screaming to flee, but I felt trapped, caught between fear and a compulsion I could not resist. The shadows seemed alive, curling around my limbs. The candlelight flickered across eyes that should not exist, and I understood with a sinking certainty that escape would not come without confronting whatever dark, ancient force had taken root. Here I swallowed hard, trembling, knowing that the next step I took could be my last, and that the forest and its hidden family were not just watching. They were part of the woods, and the woods were part of them, waiting, patient, eternal. I waited until the family's attention drifted elsewhere, and then, heart pounding, I slipped into the shadows, letting the uneven forest floor guide me. Every step was calculated, pressing close to the trees, weaving through the undergrowth like a ghost. The journal, clutched tightly in my hands, seemed to hum with a strange energy, as if it knew the path I needed to take. Leaves whispered beneath. My feet branches reached toward me, and the fog thickened, curling like smoke around my legs. As I moved, carvings appeared along the tree trunks, symbols jagged and precise, spirals and angular signs that the journal had hinted at but never fully explained. Small talismans hung from low branches, swaying gently despite still air, each on a silent warning or perhaps a marker of the family's dominion over this land. I kept my gaze moving, half expecting them to reappear, half expecting something far worse. A presence that wasn't human. Ghostly figures flickered in the mist, dissolving almost as soon as I noticed them. Whispers threaded through the fog, urgent and unintelligible, urging me to turn back, to abandon curiosity, to flee while I could. Relief came in small bursts, when the path seemed to widen, allowing me to catch my breath, only to be replaced by terror as the shadows shifted and pulsed, making me feel observed at every moment. The forest itself seemed alive, aware of my intrusion, guiding me and hindering me in equal measure. Finally, familiar terrain emerged, the main trail opening beneath the trees. My legs burned, lungs screaming, but I stumbled forward, desperate, for the safety of open space. At the edge of the woods I paused, journal still in hand, and glanced back. Among the mist and shadows, fleeting shapes flitted, barely more than glimpses of pale faces or twisted silhouettes, vanishing the moment I tried to focus. The journal, once a curiosity, now felt like a tether, binding me to the forest and its dark secrets. I realized that even though I had escaped physically, the experience, the presence, and the mysteries of these woods would cling to me. And though I had survived the night, I knew with a sinking certainty that the forest and whatever lived within it was not done with me. I sank into the driver's seat, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles burned, trying to convince myself I had left it all behind. The forest behind me was silent now, yet the weight of the night pressed against my chest, impossible to shake. The family, or whatever they were, remained a haunting mystery, their presence etched into the very air I had breathed. Fog rolled, in thick and fast, swallowing the trail, the cabin, and even the signs of the clearing I had barely glimpsed, as if erasing any evidence I had been there. Then, in the rearview mirror, my stomach sank. A pale figure lingered at the edge of the trees, its eyes catching the faint moonlight, fleeting but undeniable. It vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving only a lingering chill and the sense that the forest's hold had not loosened. The journal buried beneath leaves once more seemed almost alive, pulsing silently with secrets as if waiting for the next unwary traveler to uncover what I had. Even as the road stretched before me, questions clawed at my mind. What was real? What had I brought back from the shadows? And more importantly, was curiosity ever truly safe in these Appalachian woods, where folklore and darkness entwined, patient and eternal?